A shadow shall fall over the universe, and evil will grow in its path, and death will come from the skies.
The world blew up in 1,000 atomic fireballs. It took 2 million years for some of the radioactive clouds to allow some sun in. By then, only a handful of humans survived. The rest of humanity had changed into hideous mutants. These mutant species floundered in the bad areas, radioactive lands that never allowed them to become human again, and made each birth a new disaster.
Welcome to Glowburn, a podcast dedicated to the Mutant Crawl Classics role-playing game.
This is a test. This is also a test.
This message is transmitted at the request of the United States Office of Civil Defense at 3:40 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Or has detected a long-range nuclear missile launch in North Korea.
Come on. Let's make it out of here.
Sure you did. Time renews tomorrow.
Wait, so that's it. That's Wizards.
Yeah, isn't it awesome?
All this time, that's been what I've been waiting for.
All this time. You waited way too long, man.
I'm gonna save the rest of my comments for us going down in the shelter.
Oh, okay. Welcome to Glowburn, a podcast about the Mutant Crawl Classics role-playing game and old-school post-apocalyptic adventuring. I'm Judge Forrest.
I'm Judge James.
And for our central topic of our show today, we're going to be talking about post-apocalyptic fantasy.
Down in the shelter.
Welcome to the shelter. Down here is where we highlight our Mutant Crawl Classics and Dungeon Crawl Classics gaming, things we've been running, playing, writing, reviewing, so on and so forth. So let's see, this last week's gaming, it's been a busy week of gaming, actually. In my second edition game, I discovered that spell Pyrotechnics, cast it on a large bonfire or two. It's like a bomb going off. The characters got themselves into a fix where they ended up casting Pyrotechnics on a couple of very large, like house-sized fires, and pretty much blotted out entire sections of the entire town. After that, literally all hell broke loose because they released a devil out of a magic circle, which started summoning others, and all of a sudden it was devils and deep ones fighting each other, and the players right in the middle of it all. The cool thing about it, though, was that players got into some really deep level role playing, which was really, really awesome to see. So that was my weekly game.
Were the players the deep ones or the devils, or is that
no? Neither one. They're a group of PCs.
Because that could have been fun role playing too.
Yeah, actually, my player in that campaign, or my character in that campaign, has become a Deep One hybrid. And as the DM now, because we swapped DMing, right now I'm running him as an NPC. But anyway, that's been kind of fun because he's a bad guy.
So you're the player in that. I thought you were the GM.
I do both.
Oh,
yeah, it's a co-DM. Me and my buddy DM it. We switch off. But I've been doing it the last few months. But my player character effectively becomes a non-player character, and he's, like I said, he's become a Deep One hybrid, which has made things interesting. So anyway, there's that. Also, this last Saturday, I had the Morning Nights with Doug Kovacs and others. Yeah, it's always craziness. That one is always nuts. I don't even know where to begin on that, so I probably won't. But it's just a crazy fun time, and Doug is a great judge who flies by the seat of his pants and does it pretty well.
Imagine your wildest dreams coming true, and that's the game, right?
Well, take a look at his artwork and just like take all the pieces where there's action and movement happening and throw that into a gaming session at 7 a.m. on Saturday. It's like Saturday morning cartoons with Doug Kovacs.
And talking to Alex Perricchini, that's what I can't get. The idea of being up at 7 a.m., trying to get coffee down my throat and playing a game that early and being ready for that craziness that early. That's intense.
Now to be fair, one of the players, Jurgen, is in Germany, so he's playing. It's like 5 p.m. I think.
It's regular time for him.
For him, yeah. But for the rest of us Americanos, it's pretty early on a Saturday morning. But it's great. It's a great way to start your weekend off.
Sure.
So let's see. Other weeks. I also this last weekend I also picked up my MCC campaign, which has been on hold for a little while because of GaryCon, which I'll talk about in a moment,
Nice.
and other things. So. I got 4 new players, brand new players. I mean, they're not new to role playing. They play D&D 5e.
But new to MCC.
Definitely new to MCC, yep. We had 7 character deaths this time, which I was very proud of. Mostly killed by mutant earthworms, of all things, of all the embarrassing ways to go. There were a couple that were eaten by a sand shark, which is kind of a cool way to go. I think they thought so too. I told them ahead of time. I said, I gave them 4 0 levels, and I said, you might want to pick a favorite, but I'd be very careful. It's kind of like naming your pet chicken. It's going to get eaten at some point.
Wait a second here. You can name your chickens? Now I'm just...
Well, yeah, you don't want to though, because you're going to eat it, right? Pet chicken's going to be on the dinner table. You don't want to have a name, right?
This has got to be some kind of like Wisconsin thing. If you're growing up in Philadelphia, no one's owning chickens.
Oh, you don't have farms over there, do you? I forget that.
No, we don't. We just have streets.
So in farm country, that's a rule. You don't name an animal that you potentially will eat. So you don't name your chickens. You don't name your rabbits.
Gotcha.
These guys named all their 0 levels, and I warned them, don't pick favorites because they're going to be toast. And sure enough, every player who picked a favorite 0 level, that was the one that died. Every time, in every case. And it wasn't, I didn't do anything to have that happen. That's how it happened. But I told him it was going to. So it's just kind of one of these unwritten laws of the universe. You pick a 0 level that you really like, that guy's dead.
You still want to name them all, don't you think?
Well, yeah. I mean, I tend to name mine things like Meat Puppet and...
Oh, you're like my wife. You
Coffin Nail. I can rename them later.
It's true. You can definitely do that. I'm always throwing when my players show up with 0 level characters that have crazy off the wall names, because that's always who survives. Is like pick the character with the worst name, and you're stuck around with like Carpenter Steve is your epic wizard at 4th level, and that's who you got, which I guess is fun, but.
There is some truth to that. So anyway, they entered a beached submarine, and it really was looking like it was going to be a TPK. I thought I had a TPK on my hands. But then one of the new players figured out that if he could there was a hook and a cable in one of the rooms of the submarine. And if he could use that, he could kind of tie the door or the hatch shut so that the other evil earthworm mutants couldn't get into them from the other room that they were approaching from. So anyway, he pretty much saved the day. Otherwise, it would have been a TPK. So now they've crawled out of a torpedo tube in the front of the submarine. They're trying to find a different way in that goes around the earthworms because they're realizing that they're really, really mean earthworms. And then as far as things coming up next week, it's going to be OdysseyCon in Madison, and Daniel Bishop and Brendan LaSalle will both be running games. Now I can only make it Saturday, but I just pinged them just a few minutes ago actually, and it looks like I'm going to be able to get a spot at their table. So
nice.
get some DCC action with 2 of the more notable judges out there. So pretty excited about that. And then I've been doing lots of writing projects, especially since the American Survival Guide for Crawling Under a Broken Moon did well enough that, I have a commissioned adventure and I'm working on it. And that's going to keep me crazy busy on top of all the other writing projects I have, which are a lot right now. As far as the peripherally related, Brendan LaSalle gave me a copy of Daybreak 2250 AD, a book by Andre Norton, which I'd never read. And in reading this book, I was like, oh, well, here's pretty much the foundation for Gamma World. And by extension, MCC. It's interesting. It was written in 1952, and so it reads like your science fiction golden age pulp kind of novel. It's not a literary work of genius or anything, but it's kind of sets the stage for all the following post-atomic disaster fiction from that point on. And the other thing that interested me too is Andre Norton. She was well ahead of her time socially. It was 1952, and she was really addressing things such as racial equality in a very direct manner, and at least racial cooperation. And that was before most of the civil rights events really happened. I think Brown versus Board of Education was the next year, I think. So, I mean, she was kind of ahead of her time, which was kind of cool to see a science fiction author, taking this post-apocalyptic context and addressing a social issue of the day. And in doing so I hate to use the word progressive because it has implications, but she really was progressive, ahead of her time. So anyway, good stuff. And then, of course, going back a little bit, there's GaryCon.
Yes.
Yeah, and it was great to meet you there in person. I had a fantastic time.
I saw the Fez in person.
It's a real thing.
It is.
Yeah, when I first came, the first night I came there, I didn't wear my fez in. I wore my Wisconsin alumni hat. And a bunch of people were like, dude, I didn't recognize you. Like they literally didn't recognize me because I didn't have the fez on. So anyway, so if you see a middle-aged guy in glasses with a Wisconsin alumni hat at GaryCon, that could be me too.
That's you on day one.
Yeah, incognito. So let's see, GaryCon. We could go on all hour, but I'm not going to.
This could be a GaryCon episode if we're not careful.
It could be, and I don't want it to be. But a few points that I did want to hit on. First of all, I did get to play in Brendan's MCC adventure, The Apocalypse Arc. It was a very Thundar the Barbarian vibe, and the thing is the interior of the main section of the Apocalypse Arc was described in such a way that I started having flashbacks to the movie Logan's Run from 1976. It was weird because outside it was like Thundar and inside it was like Logan's Run, which is pretty cool. So I don't know if it was intended that way, but that's kind of how my brain looked at it. I also played in DM Kojo's session of Star Frontiers. Now, I had read Star Frontiers when I was a kid and kind of, toyed around the edges of it, but never really played it. So I think this was my first time playing. I might have played it once back in the 80s but I can't recall. The 80s are still fuzzy for me. But in this particular episode that DM Kojo ran, I was the only survivor in what would have been a TPK, and it was all because of a lucky roll. I needed basically this ship that was carrying a quantum jump mechanism, basically a black hole captive, and things went horribly wrong, as you would expect them to, and the black hole started collapsing, or the ship started collapsing, and I was in like a small craft outside, and there was another person, I can't remember who it was also in a craft outside. So we're trying to speed away from the black hole as the rest of the party gets sucked in. They just get munched, along with thousands of innocent people. And DM Kojo says, okay, well, if you're speeding full reverse, I'll give you a 5% chance to make it, and I rolled a 2. So I was pretty ecstatic, to say the least.
That's like rolling a 1 and a D40, right?
I should have gone and bought a lottery ticket after that. I guess
1 and a D50. It'd be a 1 and a D50. I can't math tonight. Sorry.
That's okay. I try not to math. Anyway, it was awesome for me. It sucked for everybody else, but it was not a TPK. And I kind of threw that in DM Kojo's face a little bit. Not a TPK. Close, but not quite.
I like how you threw it a little bit because I think, which day was that game?
That was, oh gosh, I can't remember. I have to look at my schedule. It all blurs together.
Every interaction I had with you after that, if someone came up that you hadn't seen since that game, you brought up that adventure and that encounter. So it was epic. It was pretty epic. It was epic.
It was pretty epic.
Yo, I'm saying it was epic. I'm just saying.
Yeah. Yeah, I heard some people come to me say, I heard about your Star Frontiers thing, dude, from other people. I'm like, yeah, okay, cool. Anyway, so thanks.
When you're going a 2 on a D100, the fates have smiled upon you.
Yes. Yeah, and that's good because I'll tell you, in the Apocalypse Arc, I was not rolling that well. So I kind of reset the karmic balance, I guess. So anyway, that was a blast. That was seriously a lot of fun. I always want to play a new game that I've never played before at a convention. Just one game I want to play I've never played before, and so Star Frontiers was it this time, or at least I might have played it before, like I said, but it's been so long I don't remember, so it might as well be new. It was awesome. Played a lot of Call of Cthulhu. I really love Call of Cthulhu. That's probably like my second love in gaming. There was oodles of it there, and it was great, including I got to sit down with John Hook. He's written some of the Age of Cthulhu adventures for Goodman Games. He's also one of the hosts on the Miskatonic University podcast, if anybody listens to that. If you don't, you should. I went through an adventure with John, a table full of players, and then afterwards we got to talking. We were talking about adventure design and a couple of other possible irons we want to put in the fire. But then he kind of turned and he says, so I've got these solo adventures that Chaosium is going to be publishing. Do you want to play test them? And I was like, duh, yeah. So I did, and I'll tell you, it was the solo adventure I played was just awesome. It hit on South Chicago in the 1920s and what it means to be an African American in that context in the Jazz Age. And it was awesome. It was seriously really, really good stuff. That was one of those where, you know, it seems like every con there's like one session where I come away just like emotionally fulfilled and satisfied. Like, not just that it was fun, but like there was like it hit something in me that the other games didn't quite hit. And that was it for me, was that solo Call of Cthulhu adventure that John Hook took me through. It was awesome. So as always, it was a great time. I already got my room rented at the bed and breakfast for next year. Oh, and somebody else is going to be staying there too, I just discovered. So there'll be a couple of gamers there at the...
more than just one person.
Yeah, at the Pickwick Inn, which means I'll probably have to share breakfast now, which... Yeah, well, you know, I could never eat all of it anyway, so... Well, what about you? How was GaryCon for you? This is your first one, right?
That was my first one, and I didn't know what I was getting into. I think we discussed it a little bit in episode 6 with you and Judge Brendan. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if I enjoyed my very first game, which was a Mad Max Fury Road LARP, which is essentially what I'm calling the drive from Pittsburgh to Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. That's a long drive. Although after hearing Craig Stokes talk about his drive and some other folks driving from opposite sides of the country, I can't complain that much.
Right.
So, but the con's amazing. It was such a different feel from Gen Con that it felt more like a vacation. Mm-hmm. It wasn't as stressful. You know, you get out of your game, you go and you hang out at the bar area, and someone might run into you and you're playing a game the next 10 minutes later. Mm-hmm. You don't know what's going to happen. The only challenge I had was finding food a little bit, because I have a terrible shellfish allergy, and I have to eat at places that don't serve shellfish. So I ate a lot there was like a Chipotle, I think it was, like nearby. Oh, no, it was a Qdoba. I ate a lot at the Qdoba. Uh-huh. And one can only eat so much Qdoba. Yeah. So that was my only challenge the entire convention. Other than that, it was a DCC fest. Yeah. Pretty much all of my gaming was DCC in one variety or another. I got to play in David Beatty's Dark Trails game as an occultist.
That's cool.
And Jen played as a Calavera, which was like a spirit talker. And Dark Trails is like a weird Western, kind of Deadlands-ish. Mm-hmm. And it hit all the right notes for me in that game. That was like my first game I was playing in. Well, that's not true. There was the play test of DougCon game that Wednesday night first. So it was the first official game.
Yeah, Inferno Road.
Yep, it was the first official game I played in. Mm-hmm. And it was such a great feeling. I mean, like these guys, there's playing cards in it and poker chips and whatever you can imagine you want to play, like in a DCC Western, it was there. I ran my DCC Star Wars games twice. That was a lot of fun. I think the craziest thing we did, though, that I was a part of was that I ran this quick pickup DCC Spartacus game based on like the Stars TV show Spartacus Blood and Sand, where I, the GM, was also the Lanista, and my wife was the Domina, and the two of us were running the Spartacus like battles. I mean, it was 0 level funnels of PvP, player versus players, and we would get 0 level characters, and they'd roll up randomly what their starting equipment would be. You could have bonuses to your stats based on how well you did things, like flexing, or standing on one foot, or holding your breath in real life. So it was fun to be in the bar on, I think it was Thursday night, mm-hmm. Where we have a whole group of people in the bar that are like flexing in front of my wife.
I saw you guys there. I didn't get a chance to get over there. I can't remember what was going on, but I remember seeing you guys and thinking, well, somebody's getting a workout over there. That's
what they were doing, is they were flexing to get more stamina and strength points for their characters for the arena. Nice. So that was a good time. I think my good friend Mark Plord and I are kind of working on some rules that we might toss together that'll allow other folks to enjoy the PvP of DCC gladiator fighting. From our regular game, we came home really inspired. So our regular gaming groups, one thing we picked up when we got home from GaryCon is I was kind of inspired by listening to the Gygax family, his kids talk. Mm-hmm. Especially about like they always had this weekly game going on, and Gary was so open to having folks just jump in and play. And so I started this little group of family friendly gamers to link up. I wanted a game where my friends could play, my kids could play, and my friends' kids could play as well. And we're going to try to do this a few times a month, and we cracked open the Chain Coffin box set and the Shutter Mountain Adventures. You know, the Michael Curtis wrote the Chain Coffin, and he has like, there's a zero level funnel in there, and there's like the Tales of the Shutter Mountains, and we kicked that off as like a mini campaign for the family.
Very cool.
And so we had that going on, and to the direction of you running the 7 a.m. or playing the 7 a.m. game with Doug. We don't get quite that early, but we do something in our house called Dunkin' and Dragons, where someone has to go get donuts, and whoever brings them home, they set up and we run the game. So that was nice. Good. And the only other gaming I got going on right now that was last night was our night for our ongoing Numenera campaign. And while I won't get into too many details of it, I will say that I've had a challenge the last few weeks running this campaign. I'm running an adventure called The Devil's Spine, which is one of the first adventures written for Numenera. And this is that Monte Cook game, Cypher System game, where it's a billion years in the future. And the adventure isn't quite me. I tend to go kind of crazy gonzo. That's what I like. And as I've run it, I've had a hard time running this adventure in that direction. So last night, I just decided to take one whole scene of the adventure and find an excuse to throw it back from a billion years into the future back to 1879. Mm-hmm. So I took one whole dungeon section of the adventure, and it now exists in the Old West. And I think I'm going to blame David Beatty for getting me back on a Western kick. I'm running Dark Trails as a road crew event next month for his playtest. So I was reading that, and then I was reading the Numenera adventure. I'm like, I need to find some way to get some Western going on right now. Mm-hmm. So that was my evening last night. And I guess the very last thing, I got to ask you too, we have International Tabletop Day coming up here. It'll be after the podcast release, or before.
This next weekend, right?
Next weekend, which is going to be in the past for everyone else.
Yep.
My brain is scrambled on time travel here now. I'm trying to think, is it in the past or the future? Is it 1879 or 2017? What year is it?
I'm not telling.
Well, it's a big International Tabletop Day is really big for a group here in Pittsburgh that I run called the Norwin Game Nights, and we do something every year for it. So I'll be hosting that and running it this weekend. So I'm going to ask you, it seems like there's a lot of convention action up there in Wisconsin. Do you guys have like a big International Tabletop Day presence in your game stores? Anything going on for that?
I have never even known about an International Tabletop Day event here, so I couldn't tell you. And like I said, it's just not. I mean, Free RPG Day is a big deal.
Yes.
But International Tabletop Day, not so much. The Odyssey Con's going to be having their gaming tables, but I think they only have like 4 tables, 4 or 6 or something like that. And that's all I know of. I mean, maybe there's something going on. Depending, we've got so many game stores in town, I can't keep track of all of them. So I'd be willing to bet that I'm bored over in Middleton is probably doing something, but I haven't looked at their website for a while, so I don't know.
Well, it's going to be a good time here, and what I suggest is on Friday night you just get in your car and you make the 11-hour drive to Pittsburgh, and we'll show you around on Saturday.
Yeah, I'll cancel my dinner with my wife just for that. I'm sure she'll love that.
Just bring her along. I think the last thing I have to talk about, we let in with this, and here it comes. And I was live tweeting part of this, I think, a few weeks ago. But after all of the conversation and the pressure, the peer pressure, the terrible peer pressure from Judge Forrest here.
We're getting bullied.
I was bullied into watching the 1977 Ralph Bakshi movie, Wizards. And I thought I would do a little review of Wizards.
All right, let's hear it.
Yeah, here we go. I didn't even know what this was, honestly. In fact, the only thing I knew about Wizards prior to was that there was that opening intro, that part of the intro for Spellburn that has that guy saying, like, I'm going to show you something Mother showed me when you weren't around. That's all I knew from Wizards. That's it, that one line. And in my head, I'm imagining, and that's from a movie in 1977. And in my head, I'm imagining some kind of weird movie starring Columbo where he's a mage. Like Columbo the Mage is what I'm seeing in my head. And a live action movie. I didn't know it was a cartoon. So I didn't know what I was getting into. And Judge Forrest sends me over a link to watch it on YouTube because the entire thing's on YouTube. And here's the deal. I don't think I liked it. I think the better title than Wizards, I think Wizards is not an accurate title. It should be called like Post-Apocalyptic Evil Nazi Sorcerer versus Elves. I think that's a fair title for this movie.
That's accurate.
It was pretty trippy. It was tough to watch on YouTube, but I can't imagine it's much better on Betamax, which is probably how it was first featured.
That was before Betamax, man. Sorry.
Was it?
Oh, yeah.
Well, it was 2 years prior to my birth when it came out in 77. That's as old as my wife is 77, so that was the past for me.
Yeah.
The animation of Avatar, I felt was kind of comical and silly. So he was kind of like a gnome in a way to me, which is okay, I guess. But the rest of the animation didn't match. Well, I don't understand Black Wolf's... That was the bad guy's Black Wolf, right?
Yeah, Black Wolf. Yep.
Who names their kids Avatar and Black Wolf? Besides that, I don't understand his arms. Were those muscles? Or were those... He has like 2 bones. Does he have bone arms? I guess this is a question. This is a question to you, Forrest. Were those muscles or bones, or was it both?
I'm going to hold off on making any comments about that for now. You carry on. You do your thing.
Okay. Whenever I saw, I kept thinking about that. I don't know where Eleanor's clothes were, and I had to explain that to my daughter.
I didn't even think about that.
I had to explain to my daughter where her clothes were, and I said it was 1977, and sometimes characters just didn't have clothes. And she made something like, well, all the boy characters have clothes. I'm like, they do. I will say that Weehawk was the bomb. Weehawk, I mean, holy crap, that dude, he was the man. And he kind of reminded me of Wendy Penny's ElfQuest graphic novels, comic books. That's sort of when I started getting into comic books, there was 2 comic books I read. It was ElfQuest and it was Knights of the Dinner Table. And it was way back in 1999. So we're not going that far back here. So, but no spoilers. The whole scene that happens right after the guy says, I'm going to show you something that mother showed me when you weren't around. I was not expecting what came after that. I was just...
Nobody was.
I was like, what? So, what are your thoughts?
I have a counter review to your review. So, yeah, you did have to watch it. The reason is because the power of Ralph Bakshi compels you to watch it. I don't know if you know this, but he did the original animated Lord of the Rings.
I've never seen it.
And he also did a movie called Fire and Ice, which is another animated sword and sorcery movie, which is shamefully underrated. It's actually really good. Also, did you know, Mr. Star Wars, that Mark Hamill's first acting gig was in Wizards?
I did know that because you told me that.
Yeah. He got stolen by Ralph. Actually stole him from George Lucas and said, "I need a voice." And he says, "Well, here, send this kid over there." And so he did. He did the voice of, I believe it was one of the fairy princes in the lands of the fairies. So yeah, that was, and that was before Star Wars came out. So it was actually, that was Mark Hamill's first acting gig, as I understand it. So I love the movie because it's really trippy. Not, I didn't like it because I loved it because it's really trippy. And the animation goes back to the influence of Von Bode. Von Bode was a comics illustrator back in the 1960s. And he created the what I would call a post-apocalyptic masterpiece called Cobalt 60. One of these days, I'm going to put together a Cobalt 60 campaign and run it because Cobalt 60 is awesome. And so Ralph Bakshi was kind of copying that style, even to the point of the wizard with the hat that flopped over his eyes and looked like, Jerry Garcia with a wizard hat.
Yes.
Sounded like him too. Probably sang and played guitar better though. But don't get me started on the dead. So you were wondering about Black Wolf's lack of muscles and skin, and I would say that the reason that he showed a lack of muscles and skin, it actually showed that he was powered by pure evil. Like, it was pure evil that just held him together. He didn't need muscles and skin. The other thing is Eleanor didn't need clothes. I mean, it was the 70s. Everybody was naked. In the 1970s, everyone was naked. I'm just saying. Now, you mentioned Weehawk.
I'm just trying to think. I mean, I've seen other movies. Look, I don't know about that. I have seen Smokey and the Bandit, and I don't know if that rule applies to Smokey and the Bandit. I don't remember them all being naked in Smokey and the Bandit. They weren't all naked in Star Wars.
The old adage is, if you remember the 70s, you weren't really there. That's the way it goes. So
Gotcha.
Anyway, trust me, everybody was naked. I was a kid, so I was still there. I wasn't old enough to be hanging with those kind of kids yet. So, but everyone was naked. The other thing is you'd mentioned Weehawk and ElfQuest. And actually, I read an interview with the creators of ElfQuest not that long ago. And they directly attributed their style to Weehawk. They said that's where we got our style for ElfQuest from, was from Weehawk.
That's pretty cool.
So that's really a thing. Kind of cool to see the influence, flowing through. So anyway, it was, I get how you would not like it. I get that. I did, however, put up a poll on the Glowburn community over at Google Plus, and I asked about people's opinions on wizards. Have you taken a look at that lately?
I did. I responded.
So here's how the percentages.
What were the final results?
Okay, so the possible answers were flop, fizzle, fuse lit, bang, and kaboom. So our percentages were 5% of the people voted for flop, 32% of which you are a part.
I am.
Voted for fizzle. Nobody voted for fuse lit, so the opinions were split on this. There was no middle of the road opinion on wizards.
Wow.
26% gave it a bang, and that included me. And 37%, this surprised me, gave it a kaboom. I think that's a little idealistic, but hey, because it does have its faults. That soundtrack, that soundtrack is awful.
I think I want to make sure I point out before the hate mail starts flowing in. I would never say it was a bad movie, and I was very careful in choosing my words.
Yeah.
I didn't like it, but there's a lot of things I do like that I know are terrible. For instance, I know full well that the movie Iron Eagle with Lou Gossett Jr. was not the best reflection of Cold War movies. However, I think it's far superior to the movie Top Gun because it essentially is Goonies meets Top Gun. And I know it's an awful movie. Awful.
Yeah,
but I remember it was on HBO. If you turned HBO on in 1989, there was, I think it's statistically, this is true, you can look this up on Wikipedia, there was a 45% chance that at any time in 89, Iron Eagle was on.
Wow.
And if it wasn't on, Mannequin was on.
Maybe that's why I stopped watching TV. So I'm a military kid, right?
Yep.
So I was living in England at RAF Chicksands, the Air Force Base there, when Iron Eagle came out. We saw it in the theater, and it was kind of hilarious because here I am, I'm surrounded by all these guys in uniform, and we're watching the movie, and somebody, they mentioned Ramstein Air Force Base. And the place just about went up in arms. People are yelling and booing and throwing stuff at the screen. And because it's Ramstein is the way it's pronounced, Ramstein Air Force Base. And then they screwed up Torrejon Air Base. I think they called it Torrejon or something like that. And then, was it Helena? I can't remember. There's a base in Greece also that they just mangled. Yeah, it was so bad.
It was bad. It was a bad movie. It was a bad movie.
It was not a well-researched movie. Let's put it that way. Whoever was on the research team was awful.
But people love that movie. Scratch that. I love that movie for certain reasons, and one of them was nostalgia. So I guess my question to you, Judge Forrest, is that you think it was the nostalgia of the movie, or is there really something in? And I'm asking seriously. Is there something in like the art that is captivating? Is it more the nostalgic love for it or the appreciation of what it is, or both? What for you grabs you because you were the opposite end of the spectrum? Well, I wouldn't say it was a flop. I just had it as a fizzle. Right.
And I had it as a bang, not a kaboom. So gotcha. I do see some problems with it. That's a complicated question for me. I saw it. It was the first post-apocalyptic movie that I saw and recognized it as such, where I was like, this takes place after a huge disaster. And I remember sitting in the movie theater watching that opening sequence with the bombs going off and just being like, wow, that could really happen. And it was probably the first time my mom actually let me go to a movie with my friends that she shouldn't have let me go to, because I was 8 years old and I went in the movie theater and watched it. And for some reason, usually they're kind of strict about that thing in the military, but they just let me in. I guess they figured it was a cartoon, how bad could it be?
Sure.
So I didn't understand why Eleanor was quote unquote dressed the way she was. I had no idea.
Not dressed.
Yeah, but that's probably where my corruption began. But some of it is nostalgia. Some of it is, think of the context. Back then there really wasn't anything like it. There was nothing like. Now you have all kinds of animated things. You have all kinds of fantasy, science fiction. This was before Star Wars came out. All right, before Star Wars came out. Previous to that, it was, I don't know, Star Trek the motion picture hadn't even come out.
That was not yet, I think. It was a dark time. It was a dark time for fantasy.
It was like 2001: A Space Odyssey was the closest speculative fiction. I mean, there were others, but the closest popular speculative fiction at that time.
Once if you dip into the 80s, I mean, fantasy-wise, you're stuck pretty much with Conan and Beastmaster. That's all you got. And Crawl.
Well, no, because you have things like you have Fire and Ice. You have what was that sword? Oh, it was
Dragon Slayer. Yeah, Dragon Slayer.
Dragon Slayer. You also had the guy with a sword that split into 3 pieces and flew out at people. I can't remember what that was.
But none of these movies were like you still didn't have. It wasn't the mainstream as it is now. You don't have.
No.
It was nowhere near.
And all of those came after Wizards.
Gotcha.
So I mean, think about it. The closest thing to Wizards at that time was probably like Pete's Dragon, right?
Oh.
And that was probably the closest it got. And then all of a sudden, there's this fantasy, movie on the screen, and there's like this really cool robot and tanks and blowing up Nazis and demons and all this other and wizards and all this other stuff. It made a really deep impression. So I don't know if it was necessarily that I yearn for those days of yore or anything like that. I mean, it made a really deep impression on me at the time.
I think one of the things that was tough for me was I think that separated. This could just be me. I think the concept of some kind of far future entity getting a hold of videos of Nazi Germany was pretty darn interesting. I think that itself is a really interesting concept to go down. And the idea of future fantasy, which we're going to be talking about here in a second, is a very interesting concept. It was the mixing of the two, which kind of threw me a bit, where instead of like peanut butter and chocolate, to me, it kind of felt, and since the art style is a little different between like both sides too. Yeah, it felt a little like peanut butter and pickles.
Yeah, the art is kind of jarring. And the reason that they did it that way, they did the rotoscoping, was because they ran out of money. That's why they ended up doing the rotoscoping, because otherwise it would have been animated completely all the way through, like you see with the elves and so on. But in order to make budget, they actually did the rotoscoping over some of the older, like Zulu Dawn and some of these other older movies. I think there's some kind of samurai movie where then he just put glowing eyes and funny headgear on the samurais and the Zulu and made them into demons. But that was for budgetary purposes. He was basically running out of money, and the studio's like, you got to get this done. Now, one thing I do want to point out that, and it dawned on me as I was thinking about this, one of the things that this movie did for me that has lasted throughout my gaming quote unquote career is that sense of I'll call it deep time. That's something that I learned about in graduate school in history was deep time, where you're talking about things are so old that you can't have any concept of what they're really like. And I like that in my campaigns that I run now. I like to have a deep time where cultural evolution isn't like this straight line from caveman up to space age. It's more of a sine wave where it goes, I don't know, the Hyperborean age, and then Atlantis and Mu, and then you have this crash into the caveman age, and then you have this progress up to where we're at now. Then you have a nuclear holocaust and a crash, and then you have a build up to what could be a Wizards type fantasy. So I really like that philosophical construct of a view of time, and that's really affected the way that I run my campaigns, and has for a long time, going back to the early days of D&D.
So would you say that Wizards is post-apocalyptic, or is it fantasy, or is it both? And are we just leading into our next section here?
I think the answer to all of those is yes.
Voices of the Ancient Ones.
You'll find our contact information at the end of the show if you'd like to reach out and submit show or segment ideas or ask questions about the game. Feel free to share with us what weird post-apocalyptic science fantasy world you're tromping through right now, and if you find that old esoteric mutant book, movie, or comic out there, mention that to us too. So our first voice of the Ancient Ones comes from DM Kojo.
Yes.
I was waiting for you to fanboy. There we go. Okay. So DM Gojo writes us, and he says, "Greetings, Glowburners. I wanted to write in and report on my GaryCon experience. Although I didn't run or play any MCC, I did run 2 DCC games and 2 Star Frontiers games. I was fortunate that Judge Forrest was able to join my Star Frontiers game. I'm blushing now. And that he was the sole survivor of a lost expedition. Yes, I remember it well. My only regret is that I forgot to include a robot named Tweaky among the NPCs, and that's probably good because my character wouldn't have survived then. Otherwise, it was a great session. He says, it was great to meet both Judge Forrest and Judge James in person. Maybe next year I will run some MCC. Keep up the great work, DM Kojo.
Oh, thanks for the letter, DM Kojo.
Mm-hmm. You want to take the next one?
Sure. This is from Gord Seller. And Gord says, hey guys, enjoying the podcast so far. I'm another old Gamma World fan looking forward to the chance to get a gander at MCC when it comes out. After hearing episode 5, I thought of another couple of fun robot-related sourcebooks. I don't know if you guys know the Paranoia game system, though I'd wager Forrest does.
Uh-huh.
Nice. But there were 2 that were bot-related. The better one, in my opinion, was the Big Book of Bots for Paranoia XP. But for 2nd edition Paranoia, there was also the Bot Abuser's Manual. That just sounds mean. Both books offer a point build system for building robot PCs that the tables in the XP book also handily allow for random generation. Both books also include tips about role-playing, GMing bots constrained by Asimov-type laws, a bunch of fun, i.e. catastrophic, glitches and flaws, and even some secret society stuff, the Paranoia analog to archaic alignments, including bot-only secret societies.
Scary.
Seriously. The XP book is more up-to-date, so it does some fun stuff with malware and more recent tech and storage media, and offers a more detailed botstiary as well. But the books still overlap a fair bit. That said, the Bot Abuser's Manual is a lot cheaper and easier to get online. Both lines are out of print, but XP is often crazy price and the PDFs aren't available for sale, though supposedly they will be after Mongoose's launch of the rebooted Paranoia game is complete. I didn't know that was coming out again. I also think the Paranoia game in general could be a goldmine for someone running an MCC or other post-apocalyptic game. There's tons of fun stuff to be ported over. Bizarre secret societies, crazy mutations, and hilariously terrible gizmos and weapons. But also, I think Alpha Complex, either as presented in the books or in some interesting, weird state of degeneration and collapse, would make an amazing adventuring location for MCC characters. I love the idea of the computer limping on for centuries after the population of the complex has mutated so radically it's no longer human, and still hoping it can get things back on track somehow. Maybe if it can recruit or sample DNA from those wastelanders who handily just stumbled in. Aside from the film Pandorum, anyone who reads Bruce Sterling's short story, Taklamakan, is it Taklamakan?
I think so.
Taklamakan, I don't know. From a good old-fashioned future, or played Metamorphosis Alpha would also have tons of fun, dark ideas about how old Alpha Complex specifically could end up when things really, truly fall apart. In any case, the computer definitely deserves mention if you ever get around to discussing AIs at some point in the podcast. Anyway, just some thoughts. I'm enjoying the podcast. Keep up the good work. I love the part where Gord says, though I'd wager Forrest does. He's saying you're old.
Yes, I am.
I want to say, I there's a lot here. My old school does begin like at the end of the 80s. Mm-hmm. That said, I have played Paranoia and have some experience with Paranoia. Not a lot, but I own quite a bit of first edition stuff that I got on eBay back around 2000, having played it at a convention at Lehigh University like in 1998, Epic Con. It actually was my very first gaming convention.
Oh, cool.
At the time, one of my favorite dystopian movies was Logan's Run, and I got this real Logan's Run feel from the game. Was Logan's Run in the 70s?
1976.
That makes sense. That answers your question, because was it Jennifer Agutter, whatever her name is? Like, she's practically not wearing clothing for that whole show.
It's true.
It follows the Eleanor's law.
Yep.
Anyway, with that said, I remember that I remember the computer very well. It killed tons of my characters in the game. I remember one of our adventures, the very first one I played, the GM said we were a team of troubleshooters just trying to deliver a tuna salad sandwich. I'm like, this is the dumbest adventure idea. And then the computer's like, go to R&D or weapons and development. And they start handing out our gear. It was like a bazooka, like a pair of like red lasers, a special like homing dart launcher, battle armor, and a tuna salad sandwich. And I think that game, that maybe was one of the roots of me getting kind of bizarre in my gaming years later. I ended up selling the stuff, and I'm still kicking myself years later for getting rid of all of it. I had a serious stack of, it wasn't a bot abuser's manual. There was some first edition Paranoia book that had robots in it. I don't remember what it was called, but I did own it, and I did get rid of it, and I'm again ashamed of that. But I think the computer, when I think of Alpha Complex in the computer, during my first show with robots, I brought up GLaDOS from Portal and Portal 2, and that's how I see the computer. I think that this idea of this computer that thinks it's doing a nice job and thinks it's doing its part, but really it's terribly...
It's insane.
It's insane, or it can be perceived as evil.
Yep.
That's where the computer lives on for me. So I do remember Paranoia.
If I remember right, I think there was a Paranoia session at GaryCon, if I remember.
This past one.
Yeah. I mean, obviously I didn't get into it, but maybe next time. Or maybe I'll see if it's a game hole. I'd like to jump in on that and try it.
Oh, I jump in, try it again. I still have a ham salad sandwich to deliver. All right, well, thanks for those great letters. We really appreciate them. And I think I can hear Tweaky coming. So with that said, maybe we should get moving on to the Great Disaster.
Sounds good.
The Great Disaster.
Go!
Okay, so for the Great Disaster this month, we're talking post-apocalyptic fantasy. Or I like to call, Judge James got a chance to talk about Dark Sun finally, which has been on my mind since I was first asked to come join the show.
You got a fixation.
A little bit. So I think the reason I wanted to dig into post-apocalyptic fantasy the most was because this is a way that we can dig into the post-apocalyptic games through DCC right now before Mutant Crawl Classics releases. We have a few months to go still. So
yeah, but you don't have to wait.
Right. And that's not to say Reed's been on the show, and we've talked about Crawling Under a Broken Moon, and there's some other variants out there, but let's say that maybe you don't want to have that Mad Max feel or that the more traditional post-apocalyptic feel. There's some other alternatives out there for you to enjoy the post-apocalyptic genre with more of a fantastic tone. So I think it's important for us to dig into that question of what is fantasy post-apocalypse.
Right.
And I came up with a couple of things here that we can, some differentiators. It can be either an apocalypse that occurs through fantastic means or a fantasy setting that occurs through a traditional apocalypse.
Sure. Yep.
Does that seem like a fair differentiator?
I think so. Yeah, I think, and there are clear examples of each. Yeah.
Is there some kind of alternate that we're not thinking of? Like, I don't know if there's like I guess there could be in-betweens here. There could be some other variants of, as we'll go into some options of what already exists.
Yeah, and I'm sure some will be shades of one or the other too. So
sure. All right, so we're going to just list through here a few of each. So we're going to start with an apocalypse that occurs through fantastic means, whereas the apocalyptic event is through magic or supernatural forces that are beyond science and reason. Something that you can't just say, well, this is nukes or disease. This is something else.
Right.
And I'm going to start with Dark Sun, which we'll talk a little bit about here in a few moments, a little more detail. But Dark Sun was a TSR setting for that very popular first role-playing game system. And it covers a magical ecological disaster through spell casting.
Oops.
Yeah, it's like, you know what? These spells, they drain life energy. Maybe we shouldn't keep casting them. You know what? But, unlimited power. So I'm going to keep casting these spells.
You can't help yourself.
No, I don't think you can. It was a good story of, it was back in the 90s. It was ahead of its time of climate change and all that stuff, if you will. Also, in the TSR catalog, you had Dragonlance, because Dragonlance, and that was in the 80s, right? The early 80s? Mid-80s?
Mid-80s, yeah.
And the whole Tales of the Lands happens after the Cataclysm, which is essentially like a comet or like a space or a god comet, whatever you want to call it, hits the city of Ishtar. Ishtar destroys it, and there you go. You've got Dragonlance, which exists afterwards, which still is a traditional fantasy setting, but it exists in a world that is on the other side of that.
Right. Now, some might argue that the novels that came out of Dragonlance were the actual Cataclysm.
Ooh, okay. Oh, you're messing with me. Like, you're saying, oh, look at that. I'm thinking like there's some kind of deep introspective thing here. And I like the novels. Oh no.
Oh boy. Okay. All right.
They're like my formative years, man.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to
I'm thinking
dump
there's
on
some
your
deep
childhood
introspective conversation about how, well, when Tannis does this and it affects Lorana, that really is the Cataclysm, because on a deep down and personal level, that's not what you meant.
No, I meant when somebody put pen to paper. That's when the Cataclysm started. But
moving on.
Anyway, I'll probably get hate mail for this. I'm waiting for the hate mail.
Here it comes. All right, so there's Deadlands Hell on Earth. That was by Pinnacle Entertainment Group, the folks that brought the original Deadlands out. Deadlands is one of my favorite settings. Hell on Earth.
That's some good stuff.
It really is. I mean, Deadlands originally is like a weird Western, and Hell on Earth is like the post-apocalyptic Western.
Yep.
And in Hell on Earth, the Reckoners that existed in the first Deadlands game, like the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse, they win, and people drop ghost rock bombs on everyone in like the 90s. Right. And
now I'm curious, since it was the 90s, did you ever play the collectible card games for Deadlands?
I did not. You mean it was Doomtown was one of them, right?
Doomtown was one of them.
I have some of the Great Rail Wars miniatures, but I'd never played the card games.
It's actually a lot of fun. I have a buddy who played a lot of it and played a few sessions. I like it quite a bit.
The only card games I got into was like Magic, but I sold all those to buy other stuff.
Didn't we all?
To go into some more contemporary, you can buy the reloaded Deadlands Hell on Earth. To go into some more contemporary settings, you've got Day After Ragnarok. That's by Kenneth Haidt. And in that setting, it's a Savage World setting. Hitler summons the Great Norse Earth Serpent.
Those Nazis are here again.
I know. They're a common theme.
Yeah.
The Great Earth Serpent is summoned. Enola Gay has to go on a suicide run to bomb its eye, and then it explodes and is draped over the Earth, but it's like 6,000 miles long. So the Earth is affected by the blood of the snake, and you have like Ophi tech, like Ophidian tech, and stuff that will mine out of this. You can go into the giant carcass and stuff. It's pretty interesting.
I hate it when that happens.
On the other end of going into carcasses, Sigil Stone Publishing has a setting that came out, I think last year, was kickstarted, called Belly of the Beast, which is probably the bleakest setting I've ever seen. And it's where a giant like kaiju type monster eats everything, including you and your town. And you live inside the monster. The whole campaign, the fantasy setting, takes place inside of a monster.
See, I think that sounds awesome.
It's brutal.
If you want bleak, though, you've got to go with James McGeorge, Black Sun Deathcrawl. It does not get bleaker than that.
So give us a spiel on what is the... I saw it at GaryCon. I've not cracked it open. That's the one that takes place at the end of the universe, right?
Yeah, pretty much, yeah. The whole point is there is no hope. It's been a while since I've looked at it, but it's the most bleak, nihilistic game there is, period. I don't think anything can compete with it just because of the whole conceit of it, where you have hope and you have to burn hope in order to do certain things to survive. And it's basically seeing who's going to survive the longest, and nobody's going to survive ultimately.
Hope is a stat?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. That's brutal.
Oh, it's bad, and it's one of those. It's like Cards Against Humanity, except in a role playing form. It brings out the worst in the players.
Nice.
It's a ton of fun. Anyway, yeah, that's as bleak as it possibly gets. But I do like the idea of Belly of the Beast. Some of the artwork is actually really kind of cool.
It's creepy as heck. And the idea of having to live inside the stomach of a monster, and your town is like floating on like digesting earth material is gross.
You know what it feels like to be an E. coli?
Ew. I think I want to point out that one of the reasons we're bringing all these up is like all these they're pretty easily adaptable to DCC. You can I mean, I've run Dragonlance Adventure using DCC rules before. I've run a couple of these things using DCC rules before. So all this stuff is pretty easy to mash. So if you don't like to play, if you're not a Savage Worlds fan, or you're not a Cypher System fan or a Deadlands fan, but you for the system, but you like the DCC rules, that game hacks pretty easily.
Yep.
The last of this category I'm going to bring up is I think one of the newer ones. That's Gods of the Fall. That's a Mining Cook Games game. by Bruce Cordell, and it's that heaven explodes and crashes into the planet, and all the gods die, and you play as gods.
Mm-hmm.
And although I would say that in its base system, like it kind of fits Cypher system best. Like when I first ran it, and I was in the playtest for it last year, I'm thinking, well, this would be a great 0-level funnel because it's super bleak. You know, the sun's blotted out by a giant moon in the sky, and everyone knows that there's a horrible afterlife waiting them because, like, demons, this giant demon dragon has taken over heaven, and you have nothing waiting for you after you die. It's pretty depressing.
Yeah, that's good stuff.
So on the other end of the spectrum, this is so bleak, you've got the fantasy settings that occur following a more traditional apocalypse. So this is an apocalypse that's been caused by something plausible, nuclear war, aging world, etc. And we'll start with the game that I play almost as much as DCC, and that's Numenera, where it's a world a billion years in the future. And there have been many apocalypses, or apocalypsi. Apocalypsises. Many of those, and the world is built on the detritus of all that stuff. And then another one would be, I tossed in here BioShock. I think even though it's only in one community, and that's the video game where it takes place under the sea, where you're in a societal breakdown and collapse. So it has that feeling of you're in the town of Rapture and the city of Rapture, and everything is falling apart around you, and you're trying to survive. And in the game, there's a bit more plot to it. But I think that'd be an interesting setting that sort of skirts the boundaries of apocalypse, but with fantasy, because you can cast spells that are like genetic modifications. Maybe that one's skirting the limit. So, and you got some over here too.
Yeah,
Judge Forrest. So
yeah, I mean, we've already talked about Wizards. For those who don't know, Wizards begins with an act of terror. Some terrorists set off a nuclear device, and basically that starts World War III, and yeah, everything goes into a deep slumber for a long time. Then there's one that I didn't realize was post-apocalyptic for the longest time, and that's the Sword of Shannara. And the reason I didn't realize it was I only read the first book. I hated it. So I didn't read any of the others. And it's later down the road when it comes out that actually this fantasy, this what I considered kind of a Tolkien ripoff, was actually a post-apocalyptic setting set long after a nuclear war that had occurred before. I didn't know that because I didn't finish the series, so shame on me.
Is it revealed later then? Is that what happens?
Yeah. Later on, bits and pieces come up. I don't know if you saw the was it MTV that did the special?
I saw the advertisements for it, but I don't have cable, like traditional cable, so I was waiting for it to show up on Netflix.
Yeah, I don't either, but just watching like the trailer for it, the previews, there's this giant radar dish, I guess, covered with moss and such, and you can kind of tell in the background that that's what it is. I remember that. Yeah, now if that would have been on the cover of, say, Sword of Shannara, then I might have actually taken more interest in it, knowing that there was something more to it than just elves and yeah.
All I know about Shannara is that the MTV show has like Manu Bennett in it, and Manu Bennett was Crixus in Spartacus Blood and Sand, and Crixus is like the greatest gladiator in all the Spartacus show. Did he stand on his leg and act, for your DCC game? No, but if he was there, I mean, crap, I would love to have him in my game. That'd be awesome.
That would be awesome. So a couple of others, Jack Vance's Dying Earth, of course, which I'm guessing that most of our listeners are pretty darn familiar with. Also, Gene Wolfe's novels, the 4 novels, The Book of the New Sun, is another one with an aging world, and the sun is dying, but it's very different from Dying Earth, I would posit. There's also the worlds of M.A.R. Barker's Tecumel, where the world, whatever that happens to be, slips into a pocket dimension which is isolated from the rest of the universe. So, again, I don't know how traditional of an apocalypse that is, but they're cut off from
it could happen.
The rest of the universe, right? And then it's more of a fantasy setting because there is magic that works. There is tech in there as well, but a lot of magic. And a very interesting cultural system, too, based more on the Aztecs and on Dravidian or Indian culture than anything else.
Take place in a different time period? Is that how you have the Aztec influence?
Yeah, it's kind of a different timeline, different time stream. But again, it got cut off from the rest of the universe in this little pocket dimension where there are demons and magic and so on. So, yeah, very interesting. The last one, and this one is a little bit more obscure, except for those who know it really know it, and that is the Sky Realms of Jarun. This is another instance, a role-playing game, instance of a space colony that was cut off from its mother planet Now, magic is present, so it's a fantasy in that way, but it's isolated on this world of Jarun, and the local inhabitants use basically the energy of the planet, which is called Isho, as this magical energy. And there are native inhabitants called the Shantha who are masters of Isho. So, and they've also trained, some humans get trained in the manipulation of the magical energy, but that's associated just with that planet. But again, it is a post-apocalyptic one where a space colony got cut off from everybody else. So an interesting take on that.
Very Metamorphosis Alpha, it feels like.
Yeah, except it's an entire planet and it's already inhabited by, I don't want to call them alien species because the humans are the aliens, actually.
The natives. The native species.
The native species, yeah. It's a very richly realized world. I have, I think, 2nd edition Skyrealms that I just latch onto. And it's wonderful. It's amazing. I actually pull from it for my MCC campaign now and again. Their bestiary is something else.
So kind of like straddling both of these here would be The Stand.
Yep.
The Stand kind of... You read The Stand?
I haven't read it, but I know of the plot.
So it's like 1,200 pages or
Yeah.
1,300 pages. There's like so many versions of it. It just kept getting bigger and bigger. I read one of the later versions that had a lot of pages. I read the version that's 200 pages of grim, viral death, 700 pages of people walking, and 200 pages of grim, supernatural, religious death.
Mm-hmm.
And with all jokes aside, I'm a big fan of The Stand. I thought it was a kind of a neat sort of American folklore-ish. It wasn't American folklore, but it felt like it was like a fantasy setting happening on American soil, which I thought was kind of an interesting take.
Wasn't it a virus that caused everything?
It starts out as the super flu that kills off everyone but a very, very tiny fraction. And that fraction is spoken to by either a dark man or this elderly woman. And each one is calling to those that are like they're chosen. And the people are either go to, I think it's Colorado, or they go to Las Vegas. And there's like the Boulder or Las Vegas. And there's this Boulder versus Las Vegas thing that happens in there. It's an interesting book. As a setting, it's one of those, I always consider it more like a trans-apocalypse. The apocalypse happens around the characters. It's just after the apocalypse has started that the characters are involved. And then they live through it.
Isn't there some kind of doom brought on by somebody practicing magic and getting out of control or something to that effect in there towards the end?
I don't want to spoil it. There really isn't a lot of magic in the game. It's very a lot of prophecy, a lot of good versus evil, God versus the devil, stuff like that. That's more the feel. There's not that much magic in the setting, or as much as I would say that if you were going to play it as a DCC adventure, maybe using modern 0 level occupations and then having clerics in there but no wizards. Right?
Okay.
So maybe that's the direction to go.
Okay.
So maybe some questions to discuss in post-apocalyptic fantasy. And the first is how should magic work in a post-apocalyptic fantasy game?
Right, and I guess I have even further questions as to if the apocalypse is caused by magic, does that affect magically differently after the apocalypse? And if it's not caused by magic, but it contains magic, did the apocalypse somehow spawn magic?
Well, I think if you're going to go with the apocalypse spawn the magic, that whatever magic is in your game, it should feel like it is related to the apocalypse. So, for instance, in the Day After Ragnarok, the magic should have maybe like an ancient Norse mythology feel to it, or you're actually gaining power from the giant dead snake god.
Or if it was a stand, then maybe there's some kind of biological element to it.
Sure, maybe you have control because the virus has mutated you. And I guess the idea is, does someone who sees the power, do they know the difference between magic and technology? In Numenera, everything is technology. It's just the characters don't know it. They're just controlling nanites in the air. That's how they're casting Fireball. They don't really know they're casting Fireball. It's just they're casting an ability that allows the nanites to rub together really fast and make a really terrible burning flame.
Well, that has kind of some interesting implications if we go back to Wizards. Sorry to keep bringing that up, but
no, go for it. This is the Wizards episode.
You had the Black Wolf and his Nazis basically they were using technology, and it was technology that had destroyed the world. And then on the other hand, you had the elves that had awakened after whatever it was, 10,000 years. I think it's like 100,000 years. Anyway, the elves had awakened, and they used this magic that was more tied with the earth and the kind of things you would expect with typical fantasy magic. And those two are pitted against each other. It's the basically guns against spells.
One was obviously good and one was obviously evil. Right.
Which, it was a bunch of hippies that made the movie, right? So it was, you can guess which ones were good and which ones were bad. But anyway, it's funny because there in Wizards, it's a very stark line between, technology and magic are opposed to each other. Not only is there a line between them, they don't play together. Whereas Numenera, everything's kind of the same.
Yeah, it really does. In Numenera, it is all blended into essentially one concept. Just the control of technology from a prior world that cannot be understood by those of the present world. Right. Yeah, and then there are others. I think of Tecumel. I might be pronouncing that wrong. It might be Tecumel. Anyway, Tecumel, I'll call it. Close. People discover technological objects and they are treated as magical until you really see one in action, and then you realize it's technology. And so there's kind of like the people who know that the technology works as technology and others who are more mystified by it, if that makes some sense. Anyway, it's just interesting to see those. Sometimes there is a line between the two. Sometimes the line is blurred. Sometimes it is very stark. One direction with technology to think about is, does it even exist? So you have some of those settings we just discussed, and maybe if you're using a post-apocalyptic fantasy setting as your base DCC setting, maybe technology doesn't work at all, and it's just so fractured or broken or turned off. I think we didn't bring up that there was that one show on NBC where all the power turned off, and I cannot remember the name of it. Oh, yeah. What was that called? I can't remember. I know the one you're talking about, though, yeah. It was the Power Off Show featuring the actress from Lost. The Power Off Show. But, Revolution, right? Was it Revolution? I think it was Revolution. I think that was it, yeah. Revolutions. Whatever, in that world, I'm not going to give the spoiler away in that world, but the power has turned off. So most electronic technology can't function. Most, right. And if you kind of go along that same theme, if you want to run DCC, but you want a really cool post-apocalyptic feel, you can still inject it into your regular game and then just say, well, you know what, weapons don't work. You may have to answer the reason is because reasons. Maybe get a better reason than that, or it's just so far in the past. And I think that's some of what MCC is going to be. It's so far in the past that if it doesn't work, maybe it just hasn't been maintained, or DCC. Just say there's been a phlogiston disturbance of some kind. Two mages went at it and just destroyed all of technology. Technology's gone. Yeah, easy. So we kind of discussed the line between technology and magic, which could be a good versus evil thing. Let's talk about the real good versus evil here and gods. And I don't want to get too deep philosophically here, but are the gods real? And in your setting, are they, and who are they? Well, not only that, but also do you have certain people or entities who control that technology and or magic, and are they viewed as gods even if they would not be if they were stripped of that technology or that magic? That's pretty deep. Sorry. It's a good question because you could have entities. Let's jump back here. I think it was Gord that brought up the idea of bringing the computer back. Of bringing the computer from paranoia. So you have, in his instance, a dilapidated version of Alpha Complex, and you are playing a fairly traditional group of fantasy characters in someone's setting. Maybe kind of like how some of those Metamorphosis Alpha setting campaigns start out. You're on the ship, but don't know you're on the ship. Maybe you're in just someone's fantasy setting and you come across Alpha Complex, you walk inside and the computer's there. If you're role-playing your character right, you just know there is a god in this dungeon that can kill you on a whim if you're wearing the wrong color shirt. Yeah. Yeah, really, in role-playing terms anyway, aren't the gods just all about who has the most power? Especially if you're looking at, the more of the Greek gods and the Roman gods and where they can manifest and be on Earth and interact. There's no difference between them and maybe a guy in a giant mecha suit. Really, it can make a difference are the PCs drawing power from them? So if you're going to have the cleric class, where is the cleric getting their magic from? I guess is the question.
Right. No, and it's a good question. And I think, it's also something that gets addressed in the MCC rulebook is that with the shamans, they're interfacing with AIs, patron AIs. So they're basically getting wetware. They're getting programs loaded directly into their head. Mm-hmm. So that it's technology, but it's kind of a mystical thing. And the AIs in this case become effectively gods, patrons, gods, what have you. But it's, again, because of the technology that this hierarchy is manifest again.
I think that it's one of my favorite things about the concept of Mutant Crawl Classics that I'm most excited about is these patron AI.
Yeah, me too.
And I think the reason is that, with a god in a traditional fantasy setting, let's say it's even a Greco-Roman setting and you're dealing with Zeus. Who is Zeus? Well, Zeus is he's the greatest of all gods, and he throws lightning bolts and all that stuff. I'm not sure how accurate I am on that, but whatever. That's about as far as you get. I mean, you may go into like who Zeus's kids are and that whole detail, and that can be fine for your game. I like the idea of a world where this god is Zeus, Z00S. And, right. How did Zeus start? Well, Zeus was a weather program that began as part of a weather control system, kind of like Highlander 2: The Quickening. And, that's how it existed in the beginning. And as society collapsed, it had to find something to do. And the next thing it's starting to gain power. And you can have these backstories that start from very small. It was just an operating system at one point in time.
Yep.
But as time, it changed.
Well, in my own MCC, my home MCC campaign, I have a patron AI that I've named the Mold Mother, and I think I've gone over her in the show already. But basically, the Mold Mother was a scientist, a woman who had worked on biohacking, and she had biohacked herself to take on some of the characteristics of mold, fungus, and whatnot, and some of their beneficial stuff. And this was before the Great Disaster happened. She was working on this. So when the Great Disaster happened, she was able to really ratchet up her experiments and whatnot. And she effectively became a god to some extent, or in this case, a patron AI. And she gives her followers benefits, different spells. Well, different wetware programs that have to do with mold and with mycelium and mushrooms and these kinds of things. Yeah, it's kind of gross, but it actually
it's cool. No, it's I'm not a big mold fan. So.
The players really like it. I have one player whose patron is the Mold Mother, and it's come in really, really handy. when you can walk around and you can ask this patch of mold, did anybody walk by here in the last little while? How big were they? How small were they? How many of them were there? That kind of thing. And anyway, but again, it's that technology being pushed over into what appears to be kind of an apotheosis. She's become deified because of the technology.
And that interaction, the idea that they can be interactive with the world in one way or another, and that they have an origin story, the fact that these gods, these patron AI gods, whatever you want to call them, have like an origin story to them, or you can create, and they don't have to, but I mean, the idea is that they do, that they have that. I don't know, it brings a bit of almost like believability. That it's easier to conceptualize because you can kind of understand how it came to be.
Well, one thing I really like about that, too, is that with the AIs, there is a human connection. And it may not be that the AI was human like mine was, but they were programmed by humans, right, with all the quirks that a human would program with and all the, the humanity can show through those AIs. Yes, they're set apart from normal people, but they're not so far set apart that they're unattainable or untouchable or you can't speak to them,
Sure.
Which I think can make for some really great role playing if you have the right players playing it well.
The other direction is you could just make the gods really gods too. If you want to go in the other spectrum and go towards more of it's a supernatural apocalypse that causes it. I mean, the gods appear. I know nothing about that new TV show that's based on the Neil Gaiman comics, The American Gods, but I mean, my impression of seeing it on TV is that the backstory is that it's gods have returned to Earth, Yep. You can have all sorts of directions with that. You can just because the patron AI are the way that MCC is going to work it, or doesn't mean that that's necessarily what you need to do in your game. You could have there be great supernatural entities that control things. You can bring the Norse pantheon in. We all know that Mutant Crawl Classics is going to be compatible with VCC. So if you want a cleric class, maybe you have 2 levels. Maybe you say, you know what, we're going to have the shamans that have the wetware programs and the patron AI, but there still is a godlike entity that exists up there that can grant cleric magic. And it would be an interesting place where you could have that magic versus technology feud. I can see a world where you can kind of flip that around, and maybe the gods that were not man-made, that are supernatural, caused the calamity that's occurred, but the patron AI are the ones that are like sort of helping mankind out. And there's those that worship them and pay homage to them, and they're trying to bring the world back from whatever brink it is. Then you have which side's good, which side's evil, and which side's the party joining up with.
Or if you want to mirror wizards, what you could do is you could have the Black Wolf be replaced by the brain of Adolf Hitler in a jar, and then on the other side have the King of Elfland as the patron. That'd
be pretty interesting. That'd be a pretty cool setting.
That could work pretty well, I would think.
I like that. I actually like that a whole lot.
Yeah.
The Hitler in a jar gives me like a little bit of a Hellboy connection. The Mike Mignola comics. You can see Hitler's head in a jar, and then King of Elfland there to save the day at any DCC convention scene as a patron.
Yeah, that could be kind of fun.
What would the adventurers be questing for? I think that there's so many settings that I've kind of read through, and it seems like there's a lot of options for this. I have read through pretty much every setting I have in my house to see, well, is this post-apocalyptic? Is it not? Is it post-apocalyptic fantasy? Is it not? And I've got a few settings, I won't name them, but that have great concepts, but I always have a hard time of what are the PCs doing here?
What's their motivation?
Yeah, if it's so bleak, they're just trying to survive, well, just crawl into a bunker and stay there. And I guess it's different for every post-apocalyptic setting. One idea could be that if they're trying to turn something off or on, and going back to that Revolution show, maybe they're trying to turn technology back on. Maybe that's their goal. Maybe their goal is that if it's wizards or it's based on wizards, they are on one side of that magic versus technology, and it's more of a military style campaign. One side's trying to win over the other, and they need to pick a side.
The other idea also that just came to mind is you could argue for kind of a decay versus growth.
Okay.
If the world's been decayed through an apocalypse or whatever, you could, in a very non-militaristic way, you could have people out there, like Johnny Appleseed out there questing to, bring back nature, to bring things back to a more of a balanced system.
I like when you, in a game, when you get rid of the good and evil concept. I'm not a big fan of good versus evil. I think that no one sees themselves, even those who are most evil, in a realistic fashion as actually being evil.
Right.
I think it would be interesting in that aspect would be you have your folks like your environmental Johnny Appleseed types versus those who think the entropy is cleansing, perhaps. We need to be rid of this humanity once and for all. And the only way we can do that is by totally making sure they don't bounce back. So maybe in their minds, they're not doing anything wrong. They're doing the right thing. The humanity was terrible. They caused this apocalypse, and they're trying to clean up after it.
Well, I think that's part of what makes some of the archaic alignments so compelling for MCC or cryptic alliances back in Gamma World days, where you have groups of like-minded people with motivations and goals that, to them are, this is like their gospel truth, right? But to somebody else, it's blasphemy, and it's more complicated than just good and evil. It's like interest groups, you have a variety of different interests going on. People want to emphasize one thing over another, but it might not be in direct opposition to somebody else, but then again, it might. Anyway, it makes for some fun interplay there on a world level. Actually, I found it makes for some fun interplay on a party level too. If you have, people with different motivations that are not necessarily opposed, but might not always be congruous, either.
Well, especially to have more of a sandbox style campaign where you have the party members trying to jockey with each other who's going to get who's going to get time for the party to help them with their goal. Because you don't want to have 6 players all in different directions. I mean, no one wants to GM that.
Right.
But there should be inter-party dialogue of, well, why is my goal important and yours isn't, or why is mine more important than yours is now? That's just good gaming to begin with.
It is. And one of the other things, though, that I think is unique to the post-apocalyptic setting is that your resources are so limited that in order for people to get to their own individual goals, they have to work together for some things, some basic things. One of the driving forces in my MCC campaign is finding water. There's just not much water, fresh, clean water to drink. And so that becomes a limiting thing often in that campaign. Now, if you're doing a one-shot, who cares? Big deal. But in a long-term campaign, you have to have the basics of survival, and that kind of puts the players in a position where they have to keep in mind, yes, I want to do X, and this other person over here wants to do Q, and this person wants to do Y, but we've got to drink water or we're going to die, right? So we may have to concede some things here and there. It just allows for a little bit more subtle shading in the player interaction, I think.
Sure. One question. I think the final question of our little litmus test here for how you're going to maybe tear down a setting would be, and see how you can run it with a post-apocalyptic fantasy setting with DCC is DCC or is MCC, which is the right system for maybe running the game, or or should you be dipping in or crawling under a broken moon? I think the answer for all these, I'm going to say, is yes to everything. But maybe I think if you're going to be dipping, and again, we don't have. I just have the sample materials of Mutant Crawl Classics. I know it's the same with you, Forrest. Mm-hmm. You don't have much to go on here except what we've been told. But at least my impression is going to be, if you're going to be looking at the setting more where it's leaning more towards the fantastical, you're probably going to be leaning on the DCC side. If you're going to be leaning more on the technological, it's the MCC side. But I think this is one of those points where you might be just grabbing from both and pulling from both to based on what's going to fit best. And I hope there's that modularity that's going to allow for that.
Right, which is interesting. That's kind of the concept that Crawling Under a Broken Moon was created under, right? That you could have spellcasters next to robots, and there's no contradiction there.
And that's worked at our table, and we had our Crawling Under a Broken Moon game where there's the character playing Lord Old Man Legolas of IKEA, the elf magic user. The elf, and he's a magic user, and one of the other characters is a mutant turtle, and one is a robot cleric that has cleric magic. So it works in that instance. And you know what? If you're trying to have more of a serious game where you're trying to pull it together, I think that Crawling Under a Broken Moon really works great when you're just like, I'm going to let everything happen or have a lot shoveled in there. If you want to pull things back, maybe just take a few pieces. Like the Technologist class is a great class to pull out. Heck, I use the Technologist class from Crawling Under a Broken Moon on my DCC Star Wars games.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit. You had mentioned Dark Sun earlier. I want to know more because I read the books a little bit. I love the Brahm art. I never really got a chance to play. I know the concept, but can you enlighten me a little bit more on that?
Sure. So Dark Sun. So for me, Dark Sun kind of came up at a really important time in my gaming career. I had lost my gaming group from junior high. I had just started high school, and I needed something that had some oomph to it that was going to be different. And I don't know, I felt like I was maturing in my gaming hobby. And I ran across Dark Sun via the old SSI game Shattered Lands. And it had this great sword and sandal feel to it. It takes place in a wasteland world called Athos, where it's blasted by cruel magics cast by these vicious sorcerer kings who are worshipped like gods, can bestow spells like gods to their Templars, and are evil and corrupt. And each one, there's 7 of them. Well, there's 7 sorcerer kings. There's kind of one entity known as the dragon, and there is only one dragon. All of these creatures are both magical and psionic, and the rules back in 2nd edition were that they were all multi-class or dual-classed psionicist mages.
Right.
And the setting itself, has a lot of this Brahm art, and it was designed by Troy Denning and Timothy Brown. Troy Denning went to write the Prism Pentad books, which are the novels, those D&D novels that during that time period that took you from, it was 5 books, and it took you sort of through the storyline of 3 main characters, a psionicist named Aegis, a wizard named Sadira, and a gladiator, a half man, half dwarf, all bronze, all muscular gladiator named Rikus. And for me, it was so different from the Dragonlance type fantasy and the Forgotten Realms fantasy that just touched a nerve. But the premise is it's a post-apocalyptic world where magic has destroyed the environment. There is no ocean. There is a sea of silt. And that's where the campaign took place. And
I got to tell you, this was at a time in the early 90s when it came out, when I did have a short stint where I was not playing much at all. And that was right about that time. I was just freshly married, kids, so on and so forth, school, and I almost dipped back in just based purely on the artwork, looking at Brahms' art, and I know artist Phil Hale did similar art. I don't think he did any of Black Sun, but he did a very similar art style, and I almost jumped back in then, but I just couldn't justify it just because of my time commitments. But it looks super compelling.
I think that the coolest thing with Dark Sun was that the concept that your characters, as time went on, would start small, but eventually there was no way that a 20th level character in that world would not get noticed. The idea that if you went to 20th level, you're not going to be some wizard in a tower. You were a world controlling entity. And since there were no gods in the game, you worship the elements if you were a cleric. It left that room, like that patron AI room in MCC. It left something similar for 20th level characters. You could be worshipped. You could grant powers to your followers. Things like that. It had that unlimited power feeling to it. That was what kind of like perked my interest when I first read it. And I did have a group of players that got that powerful, and their stories were totally unlike anything I was running at the time. And I was a fan of some post-apocalyptic fiction at the time, mostly movies, like Mad Max and stuff. And you could occasionally throw that stuff in there. You'd have, instead of having the cars racing through the deserts, you have lizard chariot racing through the deserts with very similar scenes where you're kind of emulating those feels, those post-apocalyptic tropes are getting tossed in there. But you've got swords and crossbows. It looked a bit more like the movie Gladiator later on. And there were gladiators. There were gladiators in that game, fighting in arenas.
So when characters got up to that higher level, I'm curious, did they, when I was a kid and we were playing that one game, of course you would inevitably stat up somebody with all 17s and 18s and make them, 15th level, 20th level, whatever. And it always felt kind of like a cheat. Just you get to that level and it's like, what do? You break out the deities and demigods and you fight them, and then what? And I'm just wondering, with your characters who actually worked their way through up to that 20th level or whatever, did they feel like the game lost any of its pizzazz at that point? I mean, it's a different emphasis, obviously, but did they feel like did they lose interest in that?
Well, I can say that I've run Dark Sun as both second edition and third edition, and fourth edition. In second edition, it was native, and same as fourth edition. Although our fourth edition game didn't last very long. In third edition, it lasted about 3 years. Our campaign did, but it was like a homebrew off of a website called Athos.org that was like a fan site that had kind of kept the game alive when it was a dead system, a dead setting. And we're getting back into my past here. So when they got higher in level, a lot of the games just stopped being about questing to find artifacts or questing to find treasure. It was about politics. And it looked more like, I guess, what you'd say, like, Game of Thrones looks like, or it looked all these weird things happening behind the scenes. Like someone needs to infiltrate the Veiled Alliance to get in, because our game, actually both times I ran long games of Dark Sun, our games became the party who was helping a sorcerer king and were bad guys. My both long campaigns just flipped. So it was like, we need to infiltrate the good guy wizards, find out, who their lead wizard is, and find a way to assassinate him. But he's too powerful, so we have to trick him into something. And I remember there were whole sessions of Dark Sun 2nd Edition where nothing fought anything. They just sat there and just discussed what their plans would be, kind of akin to what a Shadowrun game would look like, with a big whiteboard or chalkboard at the time, and drawing out like who was connected to who and who would have talked to who and who was the best PC to do what. And the party I had at the time, I can't remember the exact, it was like a Bard, a Templar, and a Thri-Kreen was a Mantis person, a Thri-Kreen Psionicist, and a Gladiator. The guy who played the Gladiator didn't talk much, so it was always like the 3 non-combat-y characters, and even the Psionicist, who was such a badass character type, he was a telepath. So I mean, he wasn't about busting people's heads. It was just an interesting game, and that could have been the group. Again, we go into like, was Wizards nostalgia or not? Dark Sun, a lot of that could be just nostalgia for me. I'm sure it wasn't the game for everyone, but that was an important game at an important time for me.
Interesting.
So one lens I thought we could throw Dark Sun through real quick is just sort of like using that litmus test we threw together earlier, just a quick highlight of how you could maybe, if you've got Dark Sun sitting on your shelf right now, if it's, or if you find it, my friend Mark found a box set of it at like a half price books or something like that for like $40. If you find it, could you do something with DCC with it maybe? It is, sort of D20 compatible. You're looking at stats that go really from 3 to 20 instead of 3 to 18. The character generation system, it was the opposite of DCC. It was 4D4 plus 4 was the...
And don't they start out with a lot of hit points too?
It depended on the character class. If you played a half giant as a race in the game, you had like double hit points.
Okay.
How does magic work in that game? It drains life energy, so that's how the apocalypse happens and why it's an ongoing environmental disaster. And there's like tons of psionics out there, so if you don't want to cast spells, you have psionics. Technology.
So could you take Al Gore as a patron?
Yeah, he exists.
Okay, all right. Just want to be sure.
He is the sorcerer king of somewhere, I'm sure. There actually is. Yeah, you know what? Al Gore, you could stat Al Gore. He would be a druid. Druids are the Al Gore of Dark Sun.
Nice.
I think it's in here. I have the book next to me. Let me see. Page. Yeah, druids are the Al Gore of Dark Sun.
I'm glad I made that snide remark.
Yeah, no, druids are like, actually, the closest you could get to a paladin. It's kind of interesting. There were no paladins in there were certain classes that didn't exist, and there were some new classes. And
sure, because you don't have any gods, so how would you have a paladin? Yeah.
No paladins, but you also have, you had the Templars. You didn't have, your clerics worshipped elements. Yep. You had a gladiator class that sort of took the warrior slot up. But I'd say the druid was like, you're defending the world from the defilers. The defilers is what you'd call the evil life-sucking mages. Right. So yeah, so Al Gore would be a druid, and I think that would fit. I think if I played name him like Gore or something. Don't name him Al Gore. It'd be tough for your GM to name your character Al Gore. Give him some, yeah. So this is a game world that doesn't have technology really. It's still fantasy tech, and materials are scarce. So weapons are hard to come by and made of inferior materials. So you might want to consider, if you roll a 1 or a 2 on your fumble, on your die roll, the weapon breaks if it's made of inferior material. That was always a problem. You had mentioned water being scarce in your MCC games. Metal is scarce in Dark Sun.
That comes from Tekimel, actually. Because Tekimel, the metal is incredibly rare. You had a beast called the Chlen, and it had a hide on it that was, if you can imagine, like a super hardened rhinoceros hide kind of thing. And so they would actually make swords out of Chlen hide and armor out of Chlen hide. If you had metal armor, you were like a king. I mean, that was the only person who had that.
Wait, when did those books come out?
Oh, Tekimel's really old.
I wonder how much was connected, because there's every single sorcerer king has a city-state that's based on a world civilization from Earth. So like Gulg is based on like Africa, like one of the like an African kingdom. Ram is based on Egypt, and then Draj is based on like Aztec or Mayan society. So there's like the king is Tektuk Title is the king of the sorcerer king of Draj. So I wonder if
interesting. They might have, because the Empire of the Petal Throne game, I think that came out in 74, 75. It was almost the same time as OD&D. So it's a really old game. I mean, it's been around a long time.
I bet there's some flavor in there.
That would be interesting because, I mean, Tekimel is an extremely well-realized world. I mean, the guy, Professor M.A.R. Barker, is the guy who wrote the game and wrote the books later, which are excellent, by the way. And it would be interesting to see what the corollaries there are between Dark Sun and Tekimel. If there's some kind of a progression, an evolution over time. That could be very interesting.
Definitely.
So there's a master's thesis for somebody if you want it.
The comparison of both and where they connect.
All right, have fun with that.
Metal is one of the features. So if you can find metal, you're in great shape. And you might want to spend all that money to buy a metal weapon just because you know it's not going to break. Because otherwise, if you're playing that game that was a low-level characters especially, it wasn't a problem for higher-level characters. They have magical items and everything. But low-level characters, you're carrying around a couple spare swords maybe, or a spare axe, or a bunch of backup weapons. And in a lot of games, you don't really need your backup weapon. This was a game where you needed to have several backup weapons. Because I think if you rolled either max damage or you roll a 1 on your damage die. So on a dagger, it's like you roll a 1, out of 4. Your non-metal weapon breaks.
Oh, man. So you're like, caddy, give me my scimitar.
Exactly. You need your scimitar caddy, carrying your bone scimitar behind you. Wow. The question of the line between technology and magic, the only thing I'd say is interesting is that in Dark Sun, and since magic comes through life energy, magic can be grown. So there were potion fruit. So instead of a potion, like a healing potion, you might find like a healing orange or a kumquat of like giant strength or something like that.
That's great.
So if again, that's a really easy. I mean, DCC is pretty loose on, and it leaves it up to the GM to come up with their magical items, and there's room for that. And since there aren't that many magical items in Dark Sun, it's really hard to come across them. I think that's a pretty good fit for DCC in general.
Yeah, that makes really good sense.
Yeah, there's no gods in Dark Sun. There you worship the elements. And if you worship anything, or if you're a druid, you worship the land around you, and that'd be an easy reskin for a cleric in either direction. To say the cleric's either you give it an earth flavor, you give it a water flavor, you just reskin some spells. It'd be pretty simple.
Right. And then for psionics,
I gotta go with Mind Games by Mr. Sanfilippo, and I have a psionicist in my DCC Purple Sorcerer Games Sunken City Adventures, and I like the Scion class that's out there already. Yep.
I totally agree. That's a great fit.
Yeah, I got the book in print at GaryCon finally. I have had the PDF for a while, but I saw it in print at the Goodman Games, but I had to grab it. So I think that fits fine. The only thing that might be a little different is that in Dark Sun, every character is supposed to have some kind of psionic wild talent. Like when you play Dark Sun in 2nd edition, you're rolling a psionic wild talent, like a random psionic power for every character in the game. And that could be as simple as going through the mind games and putting all those powers on a chart and giving everyone minor power in it, to if I think that you've got, what also could work is, this is also through Shield of Faith Studios and Reed's group, the mutations in Crawling Under a Broken Moon. They're random, and you could reskin just about any of those into some kind of psionic ability. Yeah. I think the last thing to go on here discuss is that, I really think you could do DCC Dark Sun on the fly. One night we were bored. Our regular Numenera game had run 2 players short, and I'm like, let's just play a Dark Sun adventure. And I'm like, well, I was in the mood. And what are you going to use? I'm like, we're going to DCC this. Do some 0-level characters, quick occupation list, just make sure everything feels like Dark Sun. You're all slaves on a wagon being dragged across the desert. And we did it on the fly. It was only 0 level, but I mean, you just need to come up with an occupation list, and probably some reason why, either you have to make classes for the Thri-Kreen and the Half Giant, or you just don't have a new game.
Did you give them psionic powers at 0 levels?
No, we literally ran this thing like really fast. So I think I just gave everyone, I made something up for them. I can't remember.
It might be interesting to, in DCC or MCC, run them as 0 levels, and then they get their psionic powers when they level up if they survive. It's kind of like the metagenesis for MCC, or actually any of the class abilities that you don't get until you actually have a class at first level.
It definitely takes out some of the complication of that 0 level character. Like, why bother with them until they're a little stronger?
Yeah, and survivable.
Actually, interestingly enough, I think you asked if in second edition the characters had more hit points, and I said no. I'm actually incorrect. In second edition Dark Sun, the characters started at 3rd level.
Right, that's what it was. Yes. So
you did not start at 0
that's
level,
right.
at first level. So maybe that's how if you were going to run Dark Sun DCC, you just say, well, okay, you all start at 1st level or 2nd level.
Right.
Mutagenesis.
Welcome to the Mutagenesis. This is a section of the show where we take something from media or other game systems and take a stab at converting them for Mutant Crawl Classics RPG use. So, James, what do you have for us this time for Mutagenesis?
All right, since this is my first and only time to have a significant Dark Sun podcast conversation, because really it's a good dead campaign setting, really. So I'm going to go full Dark Sun here, and I'm going to talk about El's Devourer.
Okay.
Which is a tribute to a sword called El's Drinker, and that's E-L''S, El's Drinker from the Shattered Lands PC game, which is the first and best Dark Sun computer role-playing game that there was. There was only like 2 of them, and there was Dark Sun Online that was very shortly lived. I think you pay like $2.99 a minute to play it.
Wow.
So El's Drinker was originally a sword with a vampiric touch spell working through it, and my Elven Ranger Mage, my Ranger Preserver, so the good mage was called in Dark Sun, wielded that blade viciously in combat after escaping the slave gladiatorial pits of Draj. El's Devourer is the darker cousin to El's Drinker, which makes sense because it's DCC version, okay? So
right.
What appears to be a bone battle axe, and it could be a D8 weapon or a D10 weapon, however battle axes work in your games. I'm going to say D10. But if you want to be a one-hand, it could be D8. There's no traditional +1 or +2 to hit.
Yep.
Here's how it works, okay? After a killing blow is made with the weapon, if the wielder leaves the weapon in the victim overnight, it absorbs the remaining life force of the person killed, akin to defiling magic.
Okay.
The next morning, all that is left is a pile of ash and El's Devourer. The wielder can then choose to expend 1 soul worth of life energy in any attack. Doing so gives the wielder, no matter the class, an additional 1d5 deed die that can be used like a traditional deed die. So if you're a cleric and you have El's Devourer, you can have a deed die attached to your roll. It extends one of those souls.
Mm-hmm.
If you're a warrior, this is just added to your level's deed die. So if you're second level with a D4 deed die, you'll roll on your deed a D5 plus a D4, and that applies to hit and to damage for that round.
Wow.
The life energy of that soul is expended whether or not the strike succeeds. So you better make sure you hit, kiddos. And El's Devourer can store the life energy of up to 7 souls at any given time. But of course, that means that that's 7 nights. You have to sink this thing into someone and leave it there. Unlike other weapons made of inferior materials, such as bone, El's Devourer cannot break when imbued with the life force of at least 1 victim. So, when you don't have any souls in El's Devourer and you use it to hit somebody and you roll a 1, your great artifact may be busted.
And I hate it when that happens.
So that's what I got. Judge Forrest, what do you got for us?
So I took inspiration from a picture that I saw on Twitter, of all things, because I get my inspiration from weird places, and try to get this in the show notes. But the item that this painting made me think of was something that I've called a microclimate generator. And the microclimate generators were used by the ancient ones for a variety of purposes. They could be used for mental health therapy, entertainment, setting a mood, growing plants, doing training exercises for outdoorsmen and military personnel, so on and so forth. So the microclimate generator appears as a golf ball-sized crystal ball, inside of which tiny clouds condense and dissipate repeatedly. And as you manipulate the orb by turning it and rubbing it with your fingers, a 20-foot diameter spherical zone is created in which the climate is altered. Now, the appearance of the area may also be altered to a little bit more limited extent, so it's not like an illusion generator or anything. Though seemingly simple, the device is incredibly complex, fragile, and sensitive. So the tech level on it is 5, but the complexity level is 16. So you got to good luck figuring this one out. But if you can, it's kind of cool. It takes a power cell, like most things in MCC. C cell gives you 10 charges, an F cell gives you 20, and a U cell, of course, gives you unlimited charges. So spending a charge allows you to do any of the following. And any of these things can be combined so long as they're not mutually exclusive. I'll explain, or you'll understand as I read. So sudden shifts in temperature or weather might have undesired effects also, something to keep in mind for you judges. The effects last for 5 minutes, and it travels with the person holding the generator. And so note that if you cause rain in this area, for example, and walk, it's going to leave a trail of water behind you, right? But here are some of the possible effects. And again, 1 charge for each. Raise or lower the temperature 10 degrees Fahrenheit. Create small clouds, and this you can multiply up to 5 charges. When you get up to 5 charges, it fills the entire 20-foot sphere with fog. You can create trace precipitation, which can also be multiplied up to 5 charges, which would cause either a torrential downpour or a blizzard in that 20-foot sphere, depending on the temperature at the time. It can cause aridity, so if you spend up to 5 charges on that, it'll pretty much leave everybody within there severely dehydrated and needing medical attention because it's just too dry. It can also cause visual images of a moon, stars, and comets to appear within the area of effect. You can cause sunshine to appear within the area of effect and cause a rainbow to appear in the area of effect. So that's what it does. How you use it is up to you. I like quirky little items that players can use creatively with their characters. So I'd be curious to see if anybody uses that and how they use it.
I could see a whole campaign being played around the acquisition of this device and a U cell to power it. Like you said about water being scarce in your MCC campaign. I mean, yeah, this would be, and then being that kind of link it all into what we've been talking about. You need to get this device and you're bringing it back to some king of some land who wants this thing for himself, and you realize what good it can do once you have it, and having to make the decision: do you give it to the king or do you use it to better society?
Well, and of course, you got to have somebody in the party who thinks this is just not natural, too, right?
Sure.
This thing's got to be broken, whatever the cost. So, it could be fun.
For a prior world, this was probably nowhere near that interesting. It rains every day here in Pittsburgh, but for a world in an apocalypse, this could be the salvation for a town. If it can rain torrentially, essentially forever.
Yeah, it could. Yeah. I'm thanks for bringing that up.
All right, cool.
All right. As far as announcements go, we have Gen Con 50 coming August 17th through 20th in Indianapolis. And I understand there will be Mucho DCCO and Mucho MCCO. And James, you're going to be there, correct?
I am going to be there.
Okay, I cannot make it. Maybe next year, but not this time through. But look for James. And also, I might note that we're hoping to be nominated for the Ennies Awards. We'll see what happens, what the judges think of us. But anyway, we submitted that just a few days ago. So maybe if we do win an Ennie, James is going to be wearing. What are you wearing to the ceremony?
If we get nominated for an Ennie, I will, in Judge Forrest's stead, I will wear a fez, and I will try to acquire a post-apocalyptic fez if that occurs.
Yes.
So I don't wear fezzes, just so y'all know. It's not part of my typical hat routine. I wore a giant Sorcerer Mickey hat at GaryCon.
And you rocked it.
Few people can don a Sorcerer Mickey hat like I can with giant Mickey ears. But,
yeah.
No, I'll probably be in my DCC hat for most of Gen Con. I'll wear a fez in that chance that we get nominated for any. I will show up fez on head.
Well, and if anybody, because I've had lots of people ask me where I get my fezes, it's a website called Fezorama. They will be at Gen Con. Now, the thing is, you have to crawl through 60,000 people to find them, but Fezorama will be at Gen Con, so go check them out. As far as other cons, Gamehole Con event registration is open. There will be several sessions of Crawling Under a Broken Moon being run. I will be running some. Julian Burnick, John Carnes, and of course Reed Sanfilippo will also be running. I'm assuming there will be lots of Mutant Crawl Classic sessions being run there as well. And like I said, I'll be running a couple sessions of my Killer of Giants adventure that I'm writing for Crawling Under a Broken Moon. But go to GameHole.com, GameHoleCon.com for information on that. A couple Kickstarter that I wanted to mention. The Apocalypse the Risen. This is an RPG Kickstarter compatible with Pathfinder and 5th edition D&D. The Kickstarter is going to be open by the time this episode drops, but it looks actually pretty cool. So if you're a Pathfinder or 5th edition fan, maybe you want to go buy it on the back end after the Kickstarter is delivered. And lastly, in that regard, James Ward got together with Stephen A. Lee and created a post-apocalyptic RPG game called The Lost 77 Worlds, which looks like a very extensive post-apocalyptic setting. And the estimated delivery for that Kickstarter to the backers is in July or in August, so you can look forward to another piece of very cool post-apocalyptic RPG from James Ward.
So, how to contact us? If you want to contact Glowburn, you can go to Twitter @Glowburn or email us. Email us those questions, y'all, to glowburnpodcast@gmail.com. On G+, you can find us in the Glowburn community. I am online and on Twitter @ILiveForCrits, the number 4. Or you can go to my blog site at livingforcrits.com. And Judge Forrest is over at Forrest Aguirre, Aguirre. And his blog page is at just forrestaguirre.blogspot.com. And special thanks and credits to the shaman of intros, outros, and bumpers, Bob the Voice Brinkman. Our patron AI of audio-visual engineering, the main man himself, Hector the Missile Cruz, who edits all of our ums out, except for a few. So if you hear any, you're only hearing 1/10 of the ums we're actually saying. This is full of ums. Creative advisors, our Google Plus community, currently XXX strong.
Oh.
What does that mean?
That implies all the wrong things. It's supposed to give the number. It's supposed to give the number.
Like, what the hell does that mean?
The number of people in the community. 229 is what it's at right now. So.
So, like, what does that mean?
I feel dirty.
And then our creative advisors, our Google Plus community is currently 229 strong, and we love you all. Our intro and outro song is by Chronox off their Voyager album, and it is the song Juno. And we have a link to their song in the show notes. So, closing comments for us.
Any sufficiently advanced magic is indistinguishable from technology.
And from me to all of my Numenera friends out there, just a big yay-to-see to all of you.
Ariel, Ukla, ride!
Tear down this wall.
Blood of your enemy makes you stronger.
This has been a Hectophonic production.
The gun is good, the gun is good, the gun is good, the gun is good,
I'm bored.
Me too. This 24th level Dark Elf Barbarian Assassin is lame.
Hey, want excitement?
I do.
Want adventure?
Yeah!
Then just open up a vein and pray to the Dark Master. Burn some luck and roll a die. Now you're ready to listen to Spellburn.
Welcome to Spellburn, a podcast about the Dungeon Crawl Classics role-playing game and old-school adventuring. Join the band and party like it's 1974.
Hey guys, can I play?
Sure. Check us out at spellburn.com or wherever fine iTunes are served.
Oh, cool! I summoned a demon horde!